I think I could live without, but name calling I think I could certainly get more used to. So last section, as I said, I have some ideas for getting past this, for trying to reduce incivility in American politics, or at least, again, make it more tolerable in the sense of getting accustomed to it, even getting some practice in dealing with it. So what can we do? A few things that I mentioned in my book, and hopefully you'll have more ideas, because I'd like you to take this stuff back to your campus and bat it around and see how far you can get. But first, I do think it's very important to try to teach argument. And what I mean by teaching argument is debate. And a lot of you probably did high school debate or had some familiarity with it. I am a big advocate for debate classes being required, if possible, or at least highly encouraged in a college curriculum. Because public speaking classes, which are often required, are about, putting on a good speech and good presentation and maybe learning how to use PowerPoint. But public speaking is not argumentation. Argumentation is about making a strong argument, marshaling the proper evidence for it, being ready for rebuttal, preempting other people's arguments, and getting into the evolution of a discussion in a pretty sustained way. And that's not the kind of thing that you see in a public speaking class at all. So getting argumentation formally into college curricula, again, I have argued it in the higher ed literature, I think could take us a tremendously long way to teaching college students that argument is interesting, it's fun, it's hard, but it can be learned, and it will change you as a person and as a citizen. The great thing these days with the internet and all the resources available is that argumentation can also be taught in K-12. It can be taught as early as middle school. And there are these wonderful educators out there who have created curricula and class lessons, class plans for middle school teachers, for high school teachers, to try to take almost any social and political issue and make it into a class on argumentation. So if we could see a lot more of that, I think we'd see this kind of profound change in how people talk about politics. This is a generational argument. It's about changing the way that we are educated to be citizens. It changes what we mean by a civics class or a history class, but I think it's the way to go. Teachers these days are incredibly swamped. They have to teach to the test. They've got to make sure that students perform in a way that's going to bring in the resources for their schools. But, I'd argue that teaching people how to be citizens who are capable of making arguments, engaging in debate, hopefully to some constructive end, couldn't be more important for the future of American democracy. So, I'm not saying to squeeze out calculus in place of argumentation classes, but we've got to find a way to get this into curricula. Otherwise, we're never going to give people the tools that they need to go out into their communities, their workplaces, and even into politics, if that's your chosen profession. We can't let people out there unless they know how to make an argument, how to answer one, and how to sustain a constructive debate. Second, technology. There's so many options now for online debates, for video debates, for online communities getting into debates, and maybe some of you had done some of this. There are some options out there already. One of the great things about America here in 2012, and I'm not speaking about any of you in particular, but young people seem to have no problem with self-revelation or appearing on the internet, from what I gather. And this is a great thing for argumentation and dialogue. I mean, given that you are not shy about putting your opinions and your images out on the internet, I think gives us tremendous freedom to bring you into the creation of a culture of argument. So I think we should use those technologies. I don't know exactly how Facebook could be used to create a culture of debate and argument across and through social networks. I leave that stuff to you and to my kids who actually use it a lot. But I can see the opportunities are all around us in the fact that you want to be a live participant in technology, as manifest in the internet. Third, we need to learn how to debate. We need to learn how to use technology to enhance debate and create this national culture of argument. We need to have a thicker skin. But we also need to develop a culture of listening. which is the other side of debate. You know, you can be a great debater, but not that great unless you're actually hearing the other side. And I think that's what's most aggravating about watching some of the talk shows on cable, is you get a sense that they come in there with a pretty tight script, and they will occasionally make a nod to the other person, but they're basically on their own roll, and they're not listening, and they're not processing what the other person says, or just barely and superficially. This is as profound a problem in American culture as our inability to argue. But there are some wonderful projects along these lines, some people out there working for foundations trying to encourage Americans to gain the patience and the skills of listening in a culture that is 24/7 and moving very fast and everybody doing their own thing. One of those projects you probably heard on National Public Radio, if you listen to that at all, is this project started by David Isay a couple of years ago called StoryCorps. And StoryCorps they set up a bunch of recording booths around the country and encourage people, it's free of charge, to come in as pairs and tell their stories to each other, or one per. And the goal of StoryCorps is to get people not only to tell great stories about themselves, either personal lives or political lives or culture, and have the other person listen to them and maybe ask a few questions. And of course the radio audience is out there listening as well. But the StoryCorps project is devoted to speaking, stories, narratives, listening, and developing an American culture that cares enough to slow down to listen to what other people are saying. This is biting off a huge chunk of a problem on the part of StoryCorps. It's been pretty successful so far, but they rely on your donations, so a small operation. But I can imagine this sort of thing being done in a high school, in a middle school, where students are paired up and learn to tell each other stories and have the patience to listen. So it's a glimmer of hope in a culture that has a lot of trouble listening. In the area of the fixes for incivility and how to diminish it, I get asked a lot about journalists and pundits, and particular people often. And so I can get more specific. I'm always asked about Glenn Beck. Does he represent a new form of incivility? Isn't he so problematic? And on the other side, Keith Olbermann, assuming he's still going to be on in the future, are people like this, who are very dramatic, who are very smart, but who are really kind of pushing the envelope on civility, are they responsible for the decline of public discourse in America? Are they to blame? And maybe media, particularly the truly excitable, flamboyant advocacy media, some of the folks I just mentioned, play a small part in furthering incivility. But to my mind, it's a much smaller piece of this than we'd like to admit. The truth is that viewers, and I mean tens of millions of viewers, really enjoy this stuff. They are tuning in. And that says more about the nature of citizenship and what we like than the nature of media. Partisanship in the extreme, as you're seeing right now, as you saw before the midterm elections and certainly after. And this week has been very interesting to watch as the Democrats and the Republicans try to figure out if they're going to extend any olive branches or not. So they're all kind of giving mixed messages about cooperation, but then they'll go off and give another speech about we're going to take those other people down. So I think there's a lot of confusion on their part about how to play it and who's going first and what are the implications of that, especially for power in the 2012 election. Partisanship in the extreme, even if it doesn't represent where most Americans are, that most Americans are far more moderate than anything you see represented on cable television, is engaging to people, and so is some incivility. Nobody is forcing Glenn Beck, people to watch Glenn Beck or Keith Olbermann. So, my argument is that we have to hold a mirror up to ourselves as citizens and figure out why we are attracted to particular kinds of public discourse. Likely because there isn't much else on that's as entertaining. I mean, how many episodes of Mad Men can they produce? We have become so lazy and shallow in a lot of ways that we kind of like people yelling at us and demanding our attention through antics that have a kind of circusy feel when it comes to political talk. Much depends on the journalist, the editor, the network. Some are clearly enabling incivility or civility, others aren't. We have very few models of real excellence in political discourse on television with regard to constructive policy debate. I think some of the Sunday talk shows, even if their viewership is pretty low, try to model this as best they can. The NewsHour on PBS still tries to stage debates of experts in ways that might influence issue debates. The problem is that for whatever reason, and you all are not the issue here, is that these models of debate that take a lot of patience, that take a lot of listening, are dull to a lot of people. And, as noted above when I was talking about Rod Hart's ideas, people are drawn to incivility because it is a flash of excitement in what can be a pretty boring news broadcast. So I guess, what it comes down to with the media is that if we, or they, since we're not in the media, this part is not our responsibility, can integrate more passionate debate into television news, we'll be a much better nation. But it has to be a passionate debate of a really constructive type, of a substantive type, not the name calling. Otherwise, it's just, it's not going to get us anywhere. There's nothing wrong with some incivility. It seems to be an inherent part of political debate. We can learn to recognize it better, to structure it better, to critique it, and I think we can do that through our educational institutions or through our demands that media do a better job integrating passionate debate that's also very substantive and very sophisticated. So, in closing, this is a cultural matter most of all, incivility. Do we really want to become a nation based on both civility and substantive argument? And if we want to do that, we've got to force a higher level of argument. We've got to toughen up at the same time. We have to learn to live with some incivility and even negativity, but not be blinded by it, and keep pressing for real substantive debate. It is possible. It's ideal. It would certainly be far more consistent with what the founders had in mind when they established the nation. And maybe it's why they could threaten each other with duels. They could mudsling. But somehow, at the same time, the very same time, create a real democracy, warts and all. So thanks again for listening. I know this is a lot of ideas at one time, and it's pretty dense, but I think it's important, and I think it's young people like you that are going to make this generational change toward a better public discourse. So thanks.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Sure.
I'm Hannah Sonnenstrasse. I'm from Harvard College. And I wanted to ask you about negative advertising in particular. I know, I'm going to get his name wrong, I think it's John Hickenlooper, who's now governor of Colorado, just won on Tuesday, ran a totally positive campaign, which he said didn't run a single negative ad in the entire campaign. And I'm wondering whether, as much as it's attractive to us, in theory, I'm wondering whether half the problem with negative advertising is just collective action. That if taking a high road is a lot harder if all your opponents take the low road.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could make it somehow, in theory, such that everyone took the high road, would that be better? Or, as you're saying, do we need just a little bit of incivility to keep us going? Would an all high road world actually be better?
Yeah, I guess I just don't think the all high road world is possible. I do think there's something in us that likes a good fight, and that's why we're a nation that loves football and, athletics, and surprisingly, a nation that doesn't mind people getting hurt a little bit in those games. That's something that I think about all the time in relation to incivility. So I think you're right on the whole. If we had more positive campaigns like the one you mentioned, because at a certain point, the mudslinging, you're not learning anything at all. We'd be better off. But there's going to be a certain amount of negativity. I have one colleague at Vanderbilt, John Geer, who has written a book called In Defense of Negativity. And what he did is he looked at political advertising for the last few decades, I think, and looked at the content of the ads, and he finds that negative ads have more content than positive ones. And you think about the TV ads for candidates, like the positive ones have them with their family, and their dog galloping around, and it's a sunny day, and he's telling you about a better Colorado or a better Florida or whatever it is they're running for, a better America. The negative ads tend to focus on issues. They tend to be more issue-oriented. He voted yes on this. He did that. He did that. So at least it gets actual concrete policy out into the world for people to say, I wonder if he really did vote on that horrible legislation. So again, needs some kind of balance. But I think that's been a problem with the more positive ads is they get really fluffy.